Meeting to order. This is a special called meeting. We have a very limited agenda. But before we get started, I want to remind the commissioners and the public who's watching this that we're going to have at Engine 19, our new fire truck, push out ceremony Monday the 24th, this coming Monday at 3:30 p.m. And then we're going to move from that ceremony into our chamber, and we're going to start our city commission meeting at 4:00 p.m. on Monday the... 4:30. They missed it. I'm just messing with you. It's at 4:30, but I thought I'd try. But we are having our first city commission meeting next Monday at 4:30 instead of 5:30, so please feel free to attend. So at this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to our city manager, Mr. Coffey.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. The last meeting, we talked about going back through the strategic work plan and spend a little time with that. I asked the community liaison to go through it and communicate as best she could how she felt about some of those things, and so we'll turn the floor over to her. Yes, you may.
Good morning. I think I'm just here to be your hype man. So we're going to review kind of what we've accomplished, what you've accomplished in the last 3 years. What happened to our presentation? Come on, Jason. All right, well, I'll just get rolling. So when I was looking through the strategic plan, there were 3 areas that you chose to prioritize, and those were economic development and infrastructure, quality of life, workforce development, and housing. And I'm not going to read through all the slides, but you'll see there what was identified as those main points. And really, anything we do boils down to quality of life and really economic development and infrastructure. So let's get into it. Jason, my button's not working. Okay. So from the list in the strategic work plan, you have identified these things as current and ongoing projects. And you said you wanted to wrap some of these things up and also just get rolling, researching, planning for some other. So this is a pretty large list. If you look, you'll see that you have completed some of them. Some of them are still in the works, and some of them we still need to talk about. So that is what your bingo cards are for. So please take a look at your bingo cards. You'll notice you have a free space. That was a great choice on your part. But then I want you to take about 2 to 3 minutes and write down in each of the spaces things that you can remember that you have accomplished in the last 3 years. I hear so often that we don't celebrate our wins, and so I want you to think about what you've been able to accomplish. So like 2 to 3 minutes, I'm watching the clock. Jason, go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I know, I'm not letting you cheat. Anyway, just try to fill out your card to the best of your abilities. Try to fill in all the spaces, big or small, anything that you can think of. I gave you a little moment to cheat. They're working together. Oh, yeah, true.
It was off.
It's still not working, though. Let me turn it on. You should win this, Earl.
Well, I'm trying to think how long I'm going to ride.
big and small. So what have you come up with? Earl's only got 2 lines filled out. I said Earl's only got 2 lines filled out, so. Bragging rights. If they're paying attention. All right, 1 minute. Okay, time. Did you get a good amount filled out? Yes, ma'am. Okay. So as we go through this presentation, I want you to mark off things because we're going to list some of the things we've completed, some of the things we're still working on. So I want you to mark them off. When you get bingo, I want you to let me know. Yeah, well, again, it's just bragging rights. Okay, so you remember your 3 areas of focus, and then these are your 7 short-term strategic goals, the areas that you really wanted to focus on, and you had specific projects, specific initiatives that you really wanted to put into these categories. So we're going to go through each of those quickly and then talk about what has been completed from them. So regionalism, you wanted to adopt a we're all in this together attitude. Look at housing of all types, parks and recreation, a trained workforce, economic development, collaboration, promote regional tourism, transportation, and to look past city and county lines and work together with the other cities in our county, but also our neighboring counties. So in those areas, some of the things that we have been able to complete since that initial conversation is wayfinding on major roads. The wastewater treatment plant, phase 1 is complete. And I don't know the details of all of these things. So when we get into our department presentations, you can ask questions of those department managers, but I'm just listing. So Lebanon Road, the Art Center of the Bluegrass expansion and our support of that. Relationships with BCTC and training. Randy's really done a great job of getting involved with BCTC and providing that education for employees. Perivale Road Waterline Phase 3 and the Central Fire Station Communications Tower. Where Parks and Rec is concerned, these are the big things, but if you have a little thing, we can talk about that too, because there's lots of little things that Parks and Rec knocks out every week. So Jenny Rogers, the Stanford Road Trail Crossing, Michael Smith Park, and the neighborhood parks improvements. So you've gotten new playgrounds at Jackson and Cowan, and they've started to do the neighborhood block parties. So a lot of these things could probably even go over into the ongoing, but we'll celebrate the completion of those. And the tennis complex. And then I know Earl was very active in the launch and development of the new Danville-Boyle County Development Corporation, and we still have lots of participation in that with our commissioners on the board, and I know Lee is on the finance committee, so still very active in that. And then ongoing, and again, I don't know all the details of these things, but working with the airport for their new access road. Josh has been very active with the Planning and Zoning Comprehensive Plan. He's working on wayfinding Phase 2, SCADA upgrades for wastewater pumps, sanitary sewer rehab, the 2168 trail extension, safe streets for all, bypass improvements. So safe streets for all, I should put that probably incomplete. So the first part of that was your Vision Zero plan. So that part's complete. And then now you'll move on to Phase 2. And then the wastewater treatment plant Phase 2, North Stewart's Lane extension, and the formation of the US 150 Water Commission. So next is economic development. And again, I think anything that we do is economic development. And that was one of the highlights of the strategic plan, was to use quality of life as an economic development tool. And so any services, amenities, programs, support, activities that we can create in our community is economic development. So downtown revitalization, the collaboration between the new EDA and the Economic Development Corporation, new business development of all types and sizes, quality of life, and collaborating with Boyle County and other cities. So of those things, again, a lot of these will repeat across some of the categories because they're all so intertwined. What did you just celebrate, Donna? No, I want to hear. Okay, so we've already talked about the Development Corporation. Downtown streetscape, complete, beautiful, love it. Parks improvements, so those are ongoing, but I think there are some that we really can celebrate. The Michael Smith Park improvements, and then the new playgrounds at Jackson and Cowan. First responder positions and pay, and we'll get to the kind of the specifics on those a little bit later. I'm sorry? Bingo. You already got bingo? Yay. Okay, well, Donna wins. The Art Center, wastewater treatment plant, community event support, planning and zoning, and utility projects. There's like 7 of them. And again, we'll get to the specifics later on. Ongoing things, again, support of the airport, planning and zoning, upgrading business licensing software. That's something Lee's working on and looking into. And that's going to be really beneficial to know who's here, how we can support them and attract new businesses. Our new and small business programs, like the New Business Welcome event that's being hosted in collaboration with the Chamber and Development Corporation, and some of our marketing programs that we have, like the community gift card, things like that, are meant to bolster small businesses. Then the downtown master plan implementation that's ongoing, and bypass improvements. And infrastructure. I'll let you read through what your goals were there. They took that after the streetscape was completed, and we use it for everything. I love it. All right, so again, planning and zoning, comprehensive plan, utility projects, the Safe Streets for All, Lexington Avenue sidewalks. So a lot of the sidewalks are both ongoing and sections complete. So I think that's something that Public Works is really focused on right now. Wayfinding on major roads is complete. They hired a stormwater coordinator, and she's doing a great job. Utility department reorganizing a bit, planning ahead. Trail improvements, Maple Avenue sidewalk connection, adding the text to 911 service, and maintaining utility regulatory compliance with things like the LCRR, and he's got a list of other things. And then the utility software update, so the invoice cloud, and making a lot more electronic options for customers. And then, of course, ongoing. I'll let you read through that. What I did want to kind of highlight there is the accessibility in parks. I don't know if you saw that they just recently added a ramp down to the lake. So that is something that people have been asking for, and Tommy made it happen. So, okay, Parks and Rec. What's that? I'm not sure, but it's an improvement.
This was input from you searching and researching the plan, or did you have input from all different types of staff, or?
So we went through the strategic plan, and there's an actual list in that plan, kind of things that you wanted to knock out. And so that list was reviewed by staff. Josh took a look at it, Marshall, Randy, everybody kind of took a look at it and said, okay, what did we knock out? And then what are we still working on? And we'll get to a way that we hope to be able to kind of stay up on that a little bit later.
Well,
But everybody took a look at it and said, this was my to-do list, kind of.
And to me, it's a great list, because when people ask, what's the city about, what's the city is doing, these things all say that city staff has been, is, and always will be busy.
Yeah.
Because the list never finished, never is complete.
Well, and a lot of
Full
these
list.
things are those high-level things, those
Yes,
big,
yeah.
those big ticket items, but then there's so many things. Like I ran out yesterday and just tried to get some pictures of them doing the fire hydrant flushing. And then there was a group of public works guys just fixing a piece of sidewalk. So
That's right.
there's
Yeah.
the
Well, that's-
details.
well, that's-
What?
good, good.
Yes, and yes. You're right. How are we doing on bingo? Okay. You did it? What about you?
My card's full.
I know, and it's not about your card, you've got, Earl got bingo too. You gotta check them off, 5 in a row.
Bingo.
Okay. I thought so, yeah, I thought so. Where are we at?
Next Tuesday.
Do I have this now? Okay, thank you. Okay, Parks and Rec. Lots going on with Parks and Rec all the time. So these are the things that you identified in the plan that you wanted to work on, take a look at. So aquatics, expanded parks master plan, Jenny Rogers, funding for trails, neighborhood parks, develop the former fairgrounds property, partnerships, grants, all the things. So let's see. These are the big things: the tennis complex, Jenny Rogers, Michael Smith, neighborhood parks improvements, Stanford Road Trail crossing, and pickleball improvements. And then, of course, ongoing is the master plan, exploring aquatics and a rec facility, part-time staffing, program improvements. I mean, they've had such great events lately. It's just a lot of fun to watch. Trails master plan, and then assess accessibility, which is really hard to say. Your next category was affordable and market rate housing. So I pulled that picture right out of the downtown master plan just to refresh your memory on what exactly the goal was there. And then you wanted to look at a diversity of housing stock within the city. And we'll move on. So what's been complete? So you have been working with community agencies to address homelessness, the few meetings that have been held, but also being part of the housing authority, working with the housing task force of the development corporation. So that's kind of ongoing. Any utility projects, and working with the comprehensive plan. And then obviously ongoing or kind of repetitive, same thing, just building those relationships and being part of those planning activities as we move forward. workforce development and retention, job opportunities for youth, partner with public schools and BCTC. I love that picture because because they had to share a table, but they both wanted to use their tablecloths. So just split the table. It was a great day. So recruit, develop, and retain trained workforce, support and fund the Shepherd's House and other community agencies like them. So Randy's a busy bee, okay? Expand the wellness program, add first responder positions, review compensation, expand city holidays, and review benefits. That's kind of the gist of all of that. And then again, we've added the BCTC trainings for employees and really encouraged educational development for staff. And then ongoing is the learning management software. On Paylocity, we all have trainings we have to do monthly. And those range from safety to diversity and ethics. It's very involved. And then there's the safety committee. And yeah, like I said, Randy's a busy little bee. Communication and transparency, that's all community organizations and citizens work together. Yep, that was at the open house last year for the budget. Evaluate city social media presence, and get the word out about the city, share what's going on. So far we have created the newsletter and create a process for keeping information up to date. So tried to get better about updating information on the website, sharing it through the newsletter, and maintaining relationships with local news outlets. Improving customer service. So I think the Invoice Cloud edition was really helpful for that. There's ways to communicate with water customers that we didn't have before. And then community event support. I think just being involved personally with the downtown businesses and some of those events, they're kind of a well-oiled machine already, but we've found a few ways that we can support them. And then ongoing website updates, we're looking ahead to continuing to update the website, make it more functional, participate with community organizations. I think we're always looking for opportunities to partner with other organizations. And there's an interagency meeting at the Extension office on the fourth Friday every month. And I would really encourage you guys to go to that. It's all of those nonprofit community organizations get together and share what's going on. And so I have asked her to add you to their newsletter, but I'll remind you. And then public education and outreach. We do have our civic engagement series coming up, and we're hoping to do coffee with commissioners. So whoever wants to go first on that can. Open houses, public forums, all departments are doing those things to kind of open their doors and let people peek inside and ask questions. Podcast, we just started a podcast. It's work in progress. But hopefully more people will be able to kind of hear those conversations and get a better understanding of the topics. Improve communication with staff and commission. Shout out Ashley, and explore record software. So I know Ashley and Josh are looking into how we can do better records for the cemeteries and keep that moving smoothly, and then maintain relationships with news outlets. So that is something that I'm desperately trying to achieve. So to answer your question, Kevin, what we'd like to do is to provide you a tool to be able to track our progress on some of these things. And so what we have is a spreadsheet that we can put on your OneDrive, and you can pull it up at any time. Now, it's not fully complete yet, so we're still working on getting all the details right. But you can pull it up, and I'll show you here in a minute. And so there was a lot of things today in this presentation that didn't get mentioned. And they would be in this list. And so you can look at the list, it's color coded. So the things that are green are complete, the things that are red are delayed, the things that are like the yellow color are in progress. Blue is not started, but that is typically those things that are being planned and researched and we're getting quotes for and talking about. And then the ongoing programs are things just constantly developing. That's a lot of Randy stuff. So we will be able to add that to your OneDrive once we get it in a place that we are comfortable with. So it has the project, and then it has who is in charge of that project. So who should you tell someone to contact if they have questions about that? The cost to date. Now, sometimes that's not something we can even look at. And then the start date, end date, or the anticipated start date and end date. And then at the end, there's notes. So there might be notes from the department manager or just a link to something. Like a lot of these green things here are complete. So we have references on our website or other locations online that we can just pull up the details so you can look at that.
When you access the actual spreadsheet, if you'll scroll down, you'll start seeing the list grow, and it just keeps scrolling through that tab, and you'll see the different colors start to populate. So it'll make sense, yeah.
It should play to show you that.
With the struggle with the computer today, that may not illustrate on here,
So you
but
can scroll down, there's probably 100 things on this list right now. And right now, you're just seeing the things that are complete, but there's a whole list there. So I will move on and we will share that with you later. We can move on. Okay, so I just put together some quick pictures, just walk you down memory lane, see what you guys have been up to. And I do think there's a lot to celebrate. And so that's my goal for this year, is to do a better job of celebrating the wins. The pumpkin was a win because it was cute, okay? It was really cute. I should have put music to it. So we can. We're not letting Kevin pick the music. Oh, I forgot to mention the baby box. I think that's a big one. That's a big one. So if that's on your bingo card, go ahead, you win. I know, I should have used the picture where you guys all hit the tennis balls. And the painting of the pool, making Betty Davis look good. Okay, that's it. That's all. Do you guys have any questions? We'll take it, listen, I'll take you back through them.
Somebody needs to invite you to them.
And Kevin brought cookies, so your prize for winning bingo is cookies. But I would also encourage you to hang on to your bingo card and throughout the year, check them off. But we'll send that list out and try to get it complete soon so you can reference it, pull it up on your iPad and have it on hand. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the spreadsheet's going to be a good idea. And it's going to be a quick reference for you all. I'm getting a lot of feedback for some reason today. I'm not sure everybody likes that. Yes. Oh, yeah, she's aware.
Okay, yeah.
So, so now we're going to get into the budget was about, and I appreciate what, when you get the presentation, you'll think through it but we have had a lot of success, not as a community with some of the initiatives and some of the things that Jenny Rogers is just the perfect example of it, really, honestly. But, so then if you're set up, we'll get into the budget and let Lee take over for a little bit. Go ahead.
So now that Melanie has primed you guys with all these good feelings of the things you did, we can talk about all the money that we spent doing it. Because you can't do good things, big things like we've done over the last several years without dollars to back it up. And I appreciate you all as a commission for being willing to invest in those things in a responsible way. So today we're gonna cover 24, our fiscal year 25, so the current year to date, and our year-end estimates compared to the budget, and then a brief revenue for the future discussion. Okay, so along with you have printed out slides to go along with it. You do have your detailed large spreadsheet. We were able to provide that to you a couple days ago in your OneDrive so that you could study up ahead of time. You also just have a short cheat sheet for each fund as we're going through the slides, so that I didn't necessarily have to print all the dollar amounts on the slides, and so that you didn't have to try to find page 15 on your large spreadsheet, but you are free to do so. And we will get started on general fund recap for fiscal year 24. Total revenue, we ended the year at $24,335,000. We budgeted $20,752,000. If you all remember our discussions at this point last year, we made a deliberate decision for the current year budget to make a less conservative revenue estimate. That had been our process for many years historically, is to be fairly conservative in our revenue estimates, and you see that in the difference between the actuals to budget. So the current year, when we get to fiscal year 25, you'll see a little bit smaller of a gap in our actual numbers for the budgeted revenues. Your primary driver, which you can see on your charts, are your license and fees, which were 19 million compared to budget of 16 million. 24 expenses, which included significant investment into your parks capital and your mid-year police adjustment. That was kind of our big initiative there. Can be seen compared to prior years. Those two large columns at the end in your non-departmental, that includes your general fund transfers to your streetscapes, to your park and rec, which was in total for that non-departmental around $11 million. You also increased your commitment and investment into police and fire with a $6 million budget and a $4.4 for the fire respectively, police and fire. But you can see over the years how we have deliberately put money toward staff, put money toward those salaries that were severely under market in the years past. And you can see the increased dollars, but I think based on Melanie's work earlier today, you can see the output has also been tremendous. Total general fund expenses for fiscal year '24 were $32,162,955. We had a budget amendment in the prior year, technically too. So you were under budget in total by $900,000. Fiscal '24 Park and Rec. You had general fund transfers in the amount of $6,887,000. Proportionally, that was about $1.2 million for operations and $5.5 for capital improvements. That's your largest category in the the purple, purple bluish down at the bottom. You generated approximately $400,000 in parks revenue that parks generated, which includes your program fees, your rentals, your sponsorships, concession sales. And then the remainder of the parks funding does come from a combination of contributions from the fiscal court, and they had a few small grants that year for a total of $377,000. The one thing for the future that we worked on in the fiscal '25 budget was trying to decrease the gap of city funding to help generate more revenue. Tommy's done a good job of finding more sponsorships, things like that, that we'll go into in the fiscal '25 year. Expenses for parks for fiscal '24. So we ended fiscal '24 in Parks and Rec with a total expenses, which does include your capital, of $7,447,000. $5,597,000 was in capital improvements to Jenny Rogers, to Michael Smith Park, to, I think there was a little bit of the tennis courts that got wrapped up in spending for fiscal '24. Your operating departments includes Millennium Park, the fitness center, the pool, community parks. Jenny Rogers as a department did not begin financially until fiscal year '25. So we didn't have any expenses or budget there for that year. And then you have debt service for the vehicles that the parks uses. So all in total, you're right around, I should have did a sum on that one, but right around 1.7, 1.8 million for the operations of the park system. So your utility fund for fiscal year '24. So we have a couple big outliers on the in here budgetarily, which were the very end category there was budgeted debt for bonds and loans. In fiscal '24, we did take a $6.5 million bond anticipation note. It does look skewed when you actually present the budget numbers itself, because that is considered debt and a liability. And so while we budget as a revenue, once your year end hits, once we record it properly for accounting purposes, it does not show in your year end budget revenues because it's not really a revenue. So you did take a $6 million, right around where that green line is, bond anticipation notes for some utility projects. We also budgeted some use of ARPA funds for capital projects in the utility fund, mainly Spears Creek, which really kicked off in fiscal '25, so we didn't quite get there in '24. Your utility fund water and sewer services came in at $5.8 million for water-related services, $5.6 million for sewer services, and about $600,000 for other recurring revenue in the utility fund. Okay. Your expenses for utility funds include your operations of your various departments, some debt service related to utility funds, and your capital for utility funds. Total capital in fiscal '24 for utilities was about $5.2 million. Your total budget was under budget, which is always good. Total expenses were $17,252,000 for the year. You budgeted $21,524,000. Some of your departments were a little bit over budget, mostly due to, in the utility fund for fiscal '24, healthcare. Some of them came in under budget. So in total, you were under budget in your operations in the utility fund by $69,000. Marshall has done a really great job over the last couple years of navigating those rising costs that we were seeing in fiscal '22 and fiscal '23, and managing those, partly by not backfilling some positions immediately and staggering some things that could be staggered operationally. So he's done a really good job there. We appreciate that for him for that. Your smaller funds, we didn't go in depth on the slides into the smaller funds just for, the sake of keeping it to a reasonable time frame today. But in your handy dandy chart here, the summary of those shows your municipal aid fund was in revenue was very far under budget, the same for its expenses. That was due to our, we budgeted before we knew exactly how the funds would work for that KPDI grant that was administered and utilized by the EDA for North Stewart's Lane. We originally budgeted those as city funds, but we are their custodian of funds, and so we don't want those. So we over budgeted in anticipation of that, but those didn't actually come from municipal aid or go into municipal aid. So total road aid for the year for municipal aid was $397,000. Total expenses were $356,000 for the year. Sometimes those kind of fluctuate a little bit higher spending, a little bit lower spending. Opioid funds, we, at the end of fiscal year '24, we had $91,000 in that fund. Year to date, we haven't spent anything for those opioid funds. There's been no expenses out of it. And that's something throughout the next couple years we will be mindful of what any projects that come about or specific things that we can do, because those are highly restricted, that they have to be directly tied to opioid abatement. They can't necessarily fund something like a homelessness initiative, even though opioid addiction can frequently cause homelessness. It has to be very targeted to the causes and the problems associated directly to opioid addiction and opioid improvement. So I've talked with Chief Gray and Chief Simpson a few times about ideas for it. We just haven't come up with a solid plan for suggestions to bring back to the commission, but we're always open to hearing some, because until we get a good idea, those funds will sit there on their own and kind of grow. So you could do you could wait a few more years. We have a projection right now of about $700,000 over the next 10 years is the schedule that we are supposed to receive from all of the various settlements. You could hold those. There's not a rule that says you have to spend them now. You could hold those till you have a lump sum, and then do one big project with it. I think some folks, I think specifically the county, they funded a social worker specifically for it for a period of time. I know some other cities have done grants to like not-for-profits and healthcare and things like that for specific programs. But there's no requirement currently that you have to spend it within a certain time frame. And so that's why we've been, as staff, not rushing to spend it by a certain date, so that we can have a solid plan that everybody's comfortable with and that we think is actually fits the intended purpose of these funds, rather than just getting it out the door. So, but you can certainly wait till we have a larger amount, because on hand, we only have about $200,000. We only are anticipating to receive about 100 to 130,000 a year from the settlements. And that progressively decreases over the next few years because we got a few lump sums in the beginning. So it's waiting, but we are cognizant of those funds and the things that are eligible and not eligible. Highway safety, that is our highway safety grant we get each year from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. It's a fairly minimal fund, but we keep those separate for the restricted purpose of them. We brought in $7,500 in fiscal '24. We spent about $5,000, but some of that is the timing difference in the way that the state sends us the funds versus when the staff are doing the highway safety work. The drug forfeiture fund, we received in $7,700. We spent about $6,000 in fiscal '24. And then the streetscapes fund. The revenue from the streetscape fund is almost entirely transfers from the general fund. The rest is minimal interest on that fund's dollars. We spent 1.893 in fiscal '24. That difference in the revenue versus the expense is timing of when we pay for things. So sometimes we may pay for things in fiscal '24, but we accrued it back to fiscal '23 based on when the work was performed in the invoice. So in general, the revenue in is the transfer, and that may follow the expense a little bit. So those sometimes aren't a one-for-one in total, but those are all, so those are all your governmental funds. So your other minor funds are what are considered business-type funds that are fee-based. Some of them do have general fund support, but a large portion of their revenue is derived from fees charged to the users. The cemetery revenue was $404,000. Expenses were $454,000. They do have a minor transfer from the general fund of around $150,000. Our main source of revenue there is your cemetery plot sales, the work that is done to get plots ready. Stormwater, you received in $655,000 in fiscal '24. That is 100% derived from user fees. You spent $670 in total. There was a few minor capital planning things going on for some of the stormwater projects, some engineering work that was going on. No major construction or anything of that nature has taken place for stormwater. It's really just a lot of planning for the future. Your garbage fund is primarily driven by user fees. There is a small general fund transfer to support the recycling and convenience centers of about $50,000. In total, you received in $1.39 million in fiscal '24. we spent 1.5 between the contribution to the recycling center and the fees for trash service that we pay to Republic. This one, we'll talk a little bit more in the fiscal '25 update. In fiscal '24 is the year where we had some adjustments to the user fees, and the fee that we billed did not catch up until fiscal '25. Let's see, the museum fund is the maintenance of the old federal building, and the utilities related to the old federal building, and then we have the newer building. We don't do maintenance on that building. They are currently, the tenant is currently responsible for the maintenance on the newer building, or the newer to us. Parking fund, that includes your parking garage and your parking enforcement. In total, your revenues for the parking fund were $464,000, and your expenses were $546,000. In fiscal '24, we did do some pretty big, for that fund, improvements to the parking garage storefront enclosure. We had some rainwater issues, if you all remember. And we did start in fiscal '24 adjusting the rates to the parking garage based on those long-term leases, which is something that really hadn't quite made its way through the finance department over the last couple of years. And so based on those long-term leases, we've started adjusting the rates based on COLA once a year. And so that's shown an improvement. You'll see a big improvement in fiscal '25 and will likely require less support from the general fund going forward because we're keeping up with that cost better. So that's a lot. That's fiscal '24 in a quick nutshell. Fiscal '25, so our current year. So we've included in your packet on each of the slides your estimated year end, your year-to-date as of February, and then your budget. Yes. Sure, I would love a timeout. fiscal '25, our current year, budget, year-to-date, and estimated year-end. Total general fund revenues, we are estimating to end the year at $26,401,840. There is an asterisk on this number for you all to be aware of and cognizant of as we go forward. We did fund in the current year, the EDA, a contribution of $1.6 million. And to cover that, we utilized some of the ARPA funds that had not been directed already to a specific project. And those funds will be recorded as general fund revenues in the current year. So of that 26 million, you have to think mentally, if you're thinking about your operations and how we're doing for the projects and the work that we do on a day-to-day basis, your operating revenue is closer to $24,786,840,000. So just mentally in your head, just remember that that 26 million is going to come with 1.6 that is that was specific for the ARPA project, that we had those funds that we had not allocated yet. We are estimating your licensing fees, which is your occupational licenses, your net profit taxes to come in at 19.5 million. We budgeted 17.8. So we do see that reduced gap in budgeting from budgeting less conservatively. So our budgets to actuals are going to be much tighter than they had in previous years. And compared to prior fiscal year, we're anticipating about 200,000 more in occupational tax and net profits than the previous year. That licensing fee also includes your insurance premium and your alcohol tax. Property taxes, we budgeted at 2.4 million. As of February, we were at 2.2 million. We're estimating the year end to be 2.5.
Is that 200 a good number, a good increase from one year to the
Oh,
next?
from one year to the next, I think it's very, in the occupational tax sector, it's very indicative of where our economy is. So in fiscal '25, as compared to previous years, '23 to '24, for example, and then '22 to '23, you saw some pretty huge growth in those categories because wages, for one, were growing exponentially across the country. We saw that here too. So you saw a huge jump specifically between fiscal '23 and fiscal '24 in payroll withholding. So we went from about 9 million a year to 11 million a year in payroll withholding between '23 and '24. '24, you're looking at about 11.4 to '25, 11 point, let me see, I can get you that. That's why we have the full spreadsheet. Exactly.
No, that's okay.
So '24, you brought in 11.4 in occupational license fees, and we're estimating about 11.6. So that's a combination of your new jobs. Still, a few people are growing in their wages, but it's slowed down significantly, that growth. A little bit also is, so compared to the previous year, your insurance premium is going to be fairly flat in collections. Your net profit is going to be very similar to your fiscal '24. Not a lot of growth there. We're seeing a lot more refunds in net profits than we have in previous years. And then compared to '23, it's going to be a little bit lower is what we're anticipating, because in '22, '23, we saw record profits. A lot of folks did in their small businesses, in their big businesses, and that has slowed down with the changes in the economy. So it's $200,000 over 20 million in great, but it's I feel like that's kind of where our local economy is at. So it's not going down, which is a positive. So you're welcome.
Along with that, Lee, we've lost some folks. We lost about 200 people at one factory, but yet
Yeah.
we feel like the revenue, occupational tax will be up. Is that indicative of more small business focusing on that? Or?
I think a little bit. That is, we did unfortunately lose a lot of folks in that factory. It was kind of it wasn't all quite at once. There was some, they pulled back a little bit at a time until they had that last bigger, I think it was in October-ish of the fall, when they had the announcement of the mass layoff or the official closing, and all were gone. So I think you're seeing a lot more smaller businesses coming in. We're seeing, on a day-to-day, from a business licensing perspective, we're seeing a lot of new businesses. Some don't have employees, but we're seeing a lot of small businesses with a few employees that are paying in. And then you're seeing the results of employment increases at Drake's, and then the expansion at the hospital. That brings employees in temporarily, and that kind of bolsters our that loss currently. And hopefully that gets our economic development partners are able to find somebody that wants those facilities as their new home and can replace that long term.
Yeah, understand too, that is, in terms of occupational, that specific factory is in the county. That's one of the two that doesn't hit our books directly. It has an indirect impact on us, which means it's going to show less of an impact in the short term. That will affect the businesses inside of the city more so than direct occupational taxes. It'd be an indirect impact.
Yeah. I bring it up because similar to what Melanie did, she kind of looked back at our positives, and in this case, it might be where does EDC want to focus?
And that's a great point. And I know they have.
Goes back to our
talked about
conversation, yeah, it goes back to our conversation last week. You know, activity inside of the city generally has contact with. Facilitation is what they can do inside of the city real well. They can aid with communication and that kind of thing to the city. Your utility director, city engineer Melanie, there's departments inside of the city that impact that significantly. That regional industrial recruitment has to be the focus of the EDC in terms of those larger scale employers require regional recruitment. It requires, we don't have no town our size typically has the untapped resource of workforce. So you have to look more regionally when you're getting those recruitments occurring, because that's where the workforce is going to come from. So I want to reiterate that only now, not to step on the presentation, but to reiterate it, because that is critical to how we're going to sustain the industrial bed that we do have. Right.
Good point well taken. So probably falls a little bit more over into Melody's list, what we're doing, enticing small business to move here.
So our expenses for FY '25. In total, we budgeted $23.9 million for the general fund. A few things came up throughout the fiscal year that you all, have been aware of, that we knew before the end of the fiscal year, we'll need a budget amendment to marry the two up. We had the opportunity to purchase the property where US Bank used to reside. We did not originally budget for that. Like we had previously talked about, the contribution to the EDA came about that we did not originally budget for. So those are two big numbers that hit into your capital lines and your non-departmental lines that are going to bring those pretty far over budget. We do have estimates for the year end for personnel, for health care, for our regular departments. We're seeing massive, still, we talk about it a lot, healthcare is very expensive. We're seeing impacts of healthcare on the individual departments in their expenses. You know, for instance, finance department, that's, I'll pick on myself. You know, we budgeted 75,000 based on historical, returns that, is usually pretty accurate, but unfortunately, we had an employee with some healthcare costs this year that we didn't anticipate. So that's gonna end the year at 176,000. You can see that on page 3. And the employee, it was a great, improvement to that employee, and they are doing great. But we do see those impacts on almost every department. For healthcare, we do take that into account when we create the budget. We have an expected liability and a max liability, and we budget for that max liability in our non-departmental funds or non-departmental departments within the utility fund and the general fund to help mitigate those overages. But in the individual departments, you see where those costs end up. We're also seeing increased cost in some of our overtime due to demands on staff resources. Police and fire are ones that are seeing some increased overtime. Randy is.
When you do have some off with medical, you typically see a spike in overtime too. Keep that in mind, because we still, those two things,
Yes.
when you have extended absences, that naturally leads to more overtime.
Because there are certain shifts that have to be covered by certain, our 24/7 departments can't go unmanned, and so that sometimes necessitates that overtime is derived from it. But that is something that, Randy and the department heads are very aware of, and Earl and I are aware of, and, we try to mitigate as best we can, but we do see the dollar needs to meet the needs of the citizens.
So then too, when we're budgeting the medical, we do budget to the max, but it's in the non-departmental, so that the departments, we see what the true costs are.
Yes.
And so then, it's particularly during the budget process, you see what the true costs for that department are. And then the max liability, we know is covered, but the overtime, we don't have that backstopped anywhere. Overtime, so that's something that we're gonna have to take a look at this year as department heads, is to verify our overtime number. If we're gonna do max liability somewhere, how do we account for that overage that's impacting your overtime? I don't know that answer necessarily, but the overtime number is not backstopped. The health insurance overage has got a little bit of backstop to that.
You all do a good job of anticipating, but if you ever got to where you can anticipate those types of things, I'm gonna hire you for another job. Man.
So in total, your expected estimated year-end expenses for the general fund are $27,356,000. 2.5 of that is in capital expenses, $2 million is in your debt service. 3.9 is in that non-departmental fund, which includes the EDA contribution, but also includes your transfers to other funds, parks. There wasn't much streetscape this year, so a lot of that is transferred to park for operations and some of their minor capital stuff that is spilled over into this year. And so, just as a normal course of business, we'll be bringing back a budget amendment in a normal meeting later in the year. Okay. So our park and rec. Revenue for park and rec, we budgeted at 1.6 million. With the increase to the general fund transfer that will be needed, we're anticipating currently 2.4 million. Year-to-date, we're at 1.097 million. They have done a really good job of increasing their park-generated revenue from the prior year. Right now, we're anticipating about 40,000 in additional funds from park itself, just on doing a better job of offering more things in the concessions, doing more sponsorships, just looking at where they can pick up on those. I know that's always top of mind for Tommy and his staff. We are anticipating 485,000 from a combination of your contribution from the fiscal court, which is 379,000 is what they contributed for fiscal '25, or will by the end of the fiscal year. We also, those park improvements for Cowan Street Park and Jackson Park, was it Cowan? Yeah, Cowan Street and Jackson Park were paid for from the general fund. So those grant reimbursements that we got through the Land and Water Conservation Fund will go back into the park system. And then right now, based on our year-end estimates, we're looking at about 1.4 million in transfers from the general fund to support parks operations and capital. 1.476. And if you look at your large spreadsheets, Parks begins on page 17. Okay. So Park and Rec expenses. So if you remember, because we did not quite have a strategy of what we planned for capital, we didn't budget any capital in the current year. Year-to-date, the capital expenses have been a few holdovers from the previous year that didn't get wrapped up, a couple Jenny Rogers things that carried over from fiscal '24, and Michael Smith Park that were paid officially in fiscal '25. And then there have been a few improvements at the parks themselves, which Josh and Tommy have needed. So in total, year-to-date, we're anticipating ending the year with about $575,000 in capital. Most of that is from Jenny Rogers, Michael Smith Park. Your total budget expenses in park were, where am I at? Okay. Total budget was 1.69 million, and that included no capital, so that is strictly for operations. You have about 15,000 budgeted for debt service, which is your vehicles. Millennium Park at 915, Fitness Center at 458,000, the pool at 87,000, community parks at 47,000, Jenny Rogers at 174,000. And when you compare to the estimated year end, we are over a little bit in Millennium Park, the fitness center, and the pool compared to our budget in our community parks and Jenny Rogers. So for a total of $2,444,452 anticipated by the end of the fiscal year. So, utility fund. By the end of the fiscal year, we are anticipating receiving $400,000 from the EPA in a grant that Marshall was able to obtain over the last couple of years that went toward the Spears Creek project. We are also anticipating no loan or debt, new debt in the current year. We were still spending down some of the bond funds from the previous year. And then we anticipate recording ARPA funds in the fiscal '25 year for Spears Creek in the utility fund. When you look at your operating fees, In water service, we are anticipating to end the year at $6 million for water-related services, around $6 million for sewer-related services, an additional $260,000 in other operating fees related to the water service, or those are other fees like interest. There's a tax rebate we get for one of our old, a very small one for one of our old debts that we have. In total revenue for the year end for fiscal year, we are anticipating $14,926,274 compared to our budget of that's not right. That is not quite correct. So I'll come back next time because the math isn't quite right on this spreadsheet. It is correct on your large spreadsheets. Okay. Your year-end expenses. Total estimated year-end, you're looking like you're ending your utility fund budget at $20,444,235. You budgeted $21,955,523 for a total under budget in estimated cost of $1.5 million. As I previously talked about, Marshall's done a very, very good job of cost containment when it comes to utility funds. They were seeing huge rise in like your chemical costs, your electricity, those operating costs that they can't avoid. So he's done a really good job of managing that and containing that. Your operations are anticipated to end under budget by about $250,000. So he is also seeing those increased healthcare costs. We also budgeted in that department for the max liability. He's done a very good job. I want to commend him highly. Your minor governmental funds, municipal aid, you're going to end the year with $469,000. That does include the anticipated reimbursement for the Stanford Road Trail Crossing Grant of about $90,000. You spent in the municipal aid $523,000. The opioid fund, we talked a bit about in the first round. You're anticipating ending the year in about $273,000. No expenses anticipated. Highway safety and drug forfeiture are both minor funds. Neither anticipated much beyond max $15,000 in revenue. Similar expenses as to their revenues. Streetscape, there was a few minor things that had came up over the last couple months, a couple of curbs that needed to be repaired. We're anticipating about $15,000 in revenues in transfers from the general fund necessary, and then about the same in expenses for the year end. Your business type funds, your cemetery fund, you're expected to end the year at about $410,000. Expenses are $539,000. They did have some increased cost in personnel, partly due to the healthcare we're seeing, but also if you remember a couple months back, we did have a few personnel promotions or reclasses, I should say. And that did increase beyond what we originally budgeted. Stormwater, you are anticipated to end the year at $642,000 in user fees. That is under budget significantly in total because we did budget a potential bond debt issuance for stormwater projects. We've not quite gotten the project where we need it to be ready to do that. When you look at operating fees, we also budgeted an anticipated increase to the rate since it has not been adjusted ever. That is still something Josh and I are working through for the year end. your anticipated cost at the end of the year. I threw some capital costs in there just in case, so that we knew where we were at budgetarily if we did hit it. I don't think we will quite be there. Garbage fund is one that we've been talking about internally a little bit. The garbage contract is up for renewal next fiscal year, I believe. We are looking at about 1.5 million in estimated revenues and 1.6 in estimated cost. And we are internally working to decrease that gap. There's always a little bit of a gap due to the nature of garbage service and the way we bill it. Folks that move in and out of apartments, or, sometimes we aren't always up to date, or who, Republic picks up despite they moved out 2 months ago, and we haven't got a chance to bill the new folks yet. But there's still a little bit of a gap that we're working through with auditing those accounts and trying to do a little better. Utility fund does the billing, and Josh's staff helps do the auditing. So it's a group effort on where we're at. We're working to narrow that gap. Museum fund. Revenues consist of general fund transfers. The expenses are right around 67,000 for the year. It's a little higher than budget. We'll need an amendment for this fund. If you all remember, a couple weeks back, we approved the utility payments to the Art Center based on their lease agreement with them. Going forward, we'll have those. They should be coming to you all during the community agency process and community funding process to ask for those funds so we can get those budgeted more appropriately. Parking fund, we talked about, and you do see that increase to our parking revenues, 458,000. We have estimated year-end cost of 533,000. So that does include, we budgeted about $100,000 for some capital improvements. We've not yet spent those in the parking garage, but we did include those in our estimated year-end to ensure that we accounted for it and we don't under anticipate cost. But for the current year, your operations include a small transfer from the general fund of about 130,000, which is down from several years back in 2023 of 285,000. And so we're working to reduce that reliance. And hopefully in the coming years, those user fees and changes to the way that we do that helps to support parking fund almost entirely would be great. Entirely would be fantastic, a lot less than we used to be. So that was a lot of numbers, all in a nutshell. Before we hit revenue discussion, do you guys have any questions or want to go back to any of those specific numbers? Well, you can, and we will start next time with a 5-minute, if you see anything, take these home and look at any numbers, you want to talk about them, we'll do a recap.
Well, it seems like the new software has created greater efficiency with department heads because they're finally able to see numbers more particularly. Is that going on, or?
So we talked about that. They have access 24/7 to see their numbers all the time. And I think in approving their normal bills and their normal invoices, they're able to see all those things and remember them more timely as they come about. We have kept up trying to, for a period of time, and this was because they had access to it, we did not necessarily, finance, me in particular, I did not necessarily send them a monthly report to say, hey, these are your expenses, because they had them all the time. But, You know, there may be departments that they, okay, well, if, I'll pick on Tony, he has multiple departments, right? Well, maybe he's looking at his police department regularly, but maybe he's not also checking 911 and code enforcement and parking. And so we've started that again, and I think,
That's good.
that's helpful
Yeah.
for them as staff. I think it's helpful for me, to remind me as staff to check in more often. But I do think that I see the benefit of it. I hope they do as well.
When did we start that? I couldn't
We
remember.
officially migrated in May of 2023. So fiscal '24 was a full year in the new system. So fiscal '25 is year 2.
Okay.
Yep.
I just noticed, I mean, on these numbers, to me, just, first glance, again, the garbage and recycling, we're losing money
Yes.
all the time.
Yes.
So I think something needs to, hopefully, we can make that go in the right direction in the future. And parking, I know we're working on it. But definitely the garbage, I mean, the city's been losing money forever in that area. I don't know what the answer is, but especially since our recycling's not going to recycling. I don't know, that's just a thought.
Yeah, you're going to have, there's a little bit of, because of vacancies, there's a little bit of a gap.
Right.
That number is too high. It should be lower. What we're doing right now is too much. Part of why it's upside down now is that transition in the odor rate that to us, when they were billing, us passing it on, so there was some lag there that's generated a little bit of upside down. But to your point, we've got to do a good job with Republic. And at some point, I really feel like we've got to transition to them billing and washing our hands of that lag and that interpretation. So I appreciate you pointing that out, which is one of the requests I would have for you. So Lee and I have spent a lot of time, she does a good job of leading that interpretation of numbers for us. And then, I'll look at what she says and I'll look at them on my own and we'll interact about those numbers. But what I want to make sure you all do is provide some feedback. I mean, you all have every number that we have. And so over the next few days, if you want to come by with some of your thoughts, we would welcome that. Of course, but we're estimating things and we're talking about things the way we see it. If you all have additional feedback and additional thought, feel free to provide that. And I want to make sure that's overt with you all. Over the next week if you all want to come in, we'll set aside a time to sit down with you and look at the spreadsheet. You have it in your OneDrive, you have a paper copy, then you have her summary table. So if you see something, if you just don't like the way something looks to you, you see a red flag, please share that. And I know it's a lot to do it in a meeting like this. The big thing is she's communicating outwardly her baseline presentation of what she sees today, right? And that's fine. But just remember, when we go forward, please feel free to get a meeting with us, and we'll set aside a time to go through it with you if you have an observation or a question.
I appreciate staff, I appreciate that this is really detailed, and then the staff doing as much as they can to save money in the areas they can. That's why I'm saying with the garbage fund, that's something sort of not.
Yeah, and that
we
one
can
has
look at.
been, like I said, Josh and I, we just talked about it, a month ago? We talk about it every few months. It's we don't have a good, I won't say a bad system. We don't have the perfect system of how we navigate it between how Republic determines carts and what they service and what we're billing, and we're trying to narrow that gap and get a better system. But it's not there yet, and that's one we've flagged it, and that's one we're working on. But it's not there yet.
I think the improvements with staff that Republic has made has helped a lot too, honestly. And that will continue, hopefully, on both parties, if we can get sustained effort on their side, which they're demonstrating right now, I think that will help a lot, too.
And the allocation we do for recycling for Boyle County,
Yes,
What
so
is
that's
that? How much is that?
$45,000 a year. That's
45,000,
based
okay.
on a interlocal agreement we have that is for a 10-year period. I think we're on about year 3 or 4. And that we send quarterly to the fiscal court.
I still think the garbage service and the recycling service are two of the best things that we do in this community. And I'm okay with government paying some of that expense. And the only way the major way to offset that is just to improve the cost to the citizens. And I'm a little skeptical about that, but I think we're doing a real good job. I think there could be some modifications to it, but talking about cleaning up our community, that's one of the best things we've done. It was just as controversial as building City Hall at the same location, but it's been a really major improvement in the looks of our community, the cleanliness of our community, so I don't want to lose sight of that.
Well, and to your point, I think you can't get rid of it, and we have to manage it in some form or fashion, because if you don't, you're going to end up with code enforcement issues, right?
Yeah.
I think from the financial perspective, that fund is on page 26 here of your spreadsheet, and you can see that our fund balance it's a deficit. So when you're looking on your large spreadsheet, and you're looking at the bottom number, your fund balance, if on the spreadsheet, if that is a positive number, that is not good. That is a deficit, the way the spreadsheet works.
Yeah.
And it does keep growing, and at some point, just for accounting purposes, we probably should consider either contributing more to the garbage fund to narrow that gap. And this is me just telling you guys this and not having talked specifically with Earl about it beforehand. But we do need to consider that. We don't want that to continue to grow beyond that. We do need to make better efforts as staff. This is also my opinion, not telling Josh this ahead of time. We need to make better efforts as staff, finance, engineering, working with utility fund to better bill and narrow the gap. Because we don't want to see that fund balance grow beyond what we have to. So that's just my spiel on accounting for garbage. But,
Garbage is a good thing.
uh-huh.
It just surprised me talking about garbage that we have citizens who still just have the one can. Didn't know there was a one for garbage, there was one for recycling. That just surprised me, shocked me in a way, but it's interesting.
So the last topic for today is revenue as a concept and a theory and a process for the city. And most of this revenue, we could add on general fund. General fund revenue is specifically what we're really talking about here. You do have a memo in your packet to take and read. We'll stick this on the OneDrive when I have the PDFs all for Ashley ready. And it kind of covers our largest categories of taxes, what we've been doing, and our recommendation for the budget year and for the ongoing, for the coming year. Attached to your memo is our rates, current rates of all of our taxes that we have set for the current year. Property tax rates, 24, 25, if you remember, we budgeted and we assessed the compensating rate in your property tax rates. When you look at that, your property tax rates based on your compensating rate went down slightly for 24, 25. for both your real estate and your tangible property. Your motor vehicle rate is set by, it's limited by KRS. Your net profit and your occupational tax have also stayed the same since 2017. But we discussed in this memo just year-end what our recommendation is. Property tax I wasn't going to spend much time on. We are currently suggesting that you maintain the compensating rate. You can set a differing rate once it comes time to review that and assess that when we get property value assessments for the upcoming year. That'll be in August. But we are recommending moving forward with the budget process using the compensating rate. And going forward with assessments, you can change that. That's not a decision at this point. That's a budgeting decision. Occupational rates, your net profit is 1.75%. Your occupational license fee, your payroll tax is 1.9. You are not technically capped at those rates, but there are complicating factors if you change that, and that we are recommending maintaining your current rates for that category of taxes. Your insurance premium taxes, we have also given you a chart of those. If you remember in fiscal 23-24, we reduced the tax rate due to the significant increase in premiums to kind of help benefit your citizens a little bit. We reduced the rate from 10% to 8% across all categories except for inland marine, which went to 4%, and your health insurance rate, which is remained at 0. We are recommending that stay the same for the current rate, or for the current year. Any changes to insurance premium rates have to be completed by March 21st every year to go into effect. That's a Department of Insurance requirement. So any changes that you make, unless you do it all today and tomorrow, would go into effect in a next fiscal year. We're recommending that rate be maintained at the current rate of 8% and 4% for inland marine. And as a reminder, health insurance is set at 0.
Payroll tax collection.
So that did not move forward to be a bill. Or it did not get passed. They did talk about that a lot at the House. And KLC brought that up quite a bit. They, can't quite remember if it was legislature or Senate driven, but they talked about centralized collections for occupational taxes by the revenue. They didn't make any changes. That did not move forward. Our occupational tax collector at the county and the fiscal court is in opposition to that. A lot of local jurisdictions are, because you lose a little bit of control when the state does that. As an entity that does not collect our own occupational taxes, we contract that out with the county. That brings some additional complications and new requirements potentially on us to, we're not actually sure how, if that went into effect, it would be several years, but we don't know how really that would impact us, if the funds would go to the county to be then passed through to us, if they would come directly to us. It did not mandate that taxpayers pay local jurisdictions at the state level, but it did require that it be available to taxpayers, so your larger taxpayers likely would pay through the state. However, they were one of the biggest problems on my perspective was that they did not guarantee to verify that what was being remitted was correct. So if you have an entity like Walmart's that's paying every jurisdiction in Kentucky almost, they had no guarantees that what they sent to each jurisdiction at the state level was correct. So it would be a very big a new auditing and verifying issue. So that was my biggest concern, was that we could get funds that we don't know if they are ours for a significant period of time, and then you don't want to spend tax money that's not yours. So,
It's a really big efficiency issue, and the accountants that are lobbying to have it changed, it might be slightly easier for them on what they think, but in reality, it's the whole thing is less efficient. But then the concern that Lee and I talked about yesterday too is that your occupational taxes, you're only collecting, if you're really efficient, you're collecting 100%. Probably your average efficiency is between 90 and 93%. And so you're constantly correcting back to that number. Then over a 5-year period, it trends down to where you're collecting 83% efficient, which is kind of the industry average for communities like ours. And then you have to really go through a heavy audit and really, look at everything and to get it back to that higher efficiency. And that equates in the dollars for communities to survive on and provide the services on. And so you're constantly oscillating, with a lower efficiency and a higher efficiency, and that impacts your net revenue, right? So then with the state doing that, I don't know that you would achieve anywhere close to your higher efficiencies. You likely will see a lower efficiency, which means you're collecting less revenue for the same. And then the complicating factor with that is it will no longer be predictable. It will be much less predictable for local governments. And so, I don't know, that just seems like an all-around bad idea, and not even one that the implication is, it's going to be simpler. Well, it's not. Yeah. And there's you can argue against that pretty quick, and that's not about local government and local control, which is kind of what some of the implication was, why they wanted to change it, but it's just strictly about the efficiency of applying and collecting and paying the tax.
Well, it should be about local collection and control, really. I mean, that's why we collect it, but.
And it affects counties more so because they collect taxes for the cities.
Right.
A lot of times. And so that it would remove that portion of their operation, right? It's just not a.
Yeah. I don't even like the fact that they collect insurance premium tax. I never know if we get what we're supposed to get on that either, but
So
that's
we
not as big a deal.
we are taking steps for the city at least to, it is hard for us to know if what on an insurance premium return is correct or not. We can verify what they said to the state that they gave us. But whether they actually assessed it correctly for their customers or not is a question mark that I don't know that we have the authority to really dive into, or the expertise at the moment, on how we do that. But we do verify, that what they're remitting to the state, or what they say that we verify that the insurance companies say they're sending X dollars to the state, that we get X dollars. For the most part, it's pretty on track, but it's what they collected from customers is a big question mark, so.
Leah, what did you say the occupational tax rate is?
1.75 for net profits and 1.9 for payroll withholding. That's been set since 2017 at those rates.
Payroll is 1.97?
1.9,
1.9, okay.
yes, and 1.75 for net profits.
Okay.
And again, the couple of the things that we do like to point out is the fact that you do have expenses tied to the application of health insurance premiums and expenses tied to the health industry. Your insurance premium tax on health insurance is 0. The average amongst the cities on the bottom of the screen there, at the bottom of that slide, not the screen, but on your sheet, in the memo is 5.5%. So I just want to make sure we reiterate that. We're not necessarily suggesting to change it. But then also the big question really is the restaurant tax and how to handle that in the future when that time is there. We're still weighing in on, or weighing amongst each other, you know, what should we do about that? We know that ultimately, the purpose of it would be to fund your Parks and Rec, not your program, but your capital and some of those infrastructure needs that other people use besides folks in the city, like when you do have people come in from out of town and whatnot. So the restaurant tax is a future discussion for us. And then your insurance premium tax is something, you know, that we just have to note that as zero, and that's an unusual zero.
So we did include your ABC rates in there as well. We, if you remember, increased that rate to 5% last fiscal year. And then we did give you a bit longer compared to the other taxes discussion on, like Earl was mentioning, the restaurant tax for you guys to consider over the weeks and months ahead for the future. That is not fully, it's been tested, but it's not fully settled legally, and so there are challenges to implementing something like that.
So we, as a commission, voted to pass a restaurant tax and effective July the 1st of 2025. What would be the recourse?
The number,
They were, a suit was filed against them by the Attorney General. And
State
so-
Attorney General.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so that would be, I would anticipate what would happen here as well.
But Hazard came
Hazard
out-
was successful in the defense of their eligibility.
And all the rest of the cities that were part of the suit.
Well, at the time, the Hazard was the only city that did it through the process they did. So there was no suing the state for discriminatory behavior towards local communities. It was just Hazard just did it, tried to make the state stop them. And so that was a little bit different than what had been done, or the discussions that had been done in the past. Something that we are actively talking about with KLC, talking about with Dexter, just trying to figure out exactly what and when do you open the floor for the discussion. Community, I say this again, for all parties involved, whether they like it or not, the communities that when we are in our office and we get calls and people say, why don't you all have that? Why don't you all have that? I went here and they had this and we want that too. 99.999% of the time, the communities that have what people come back and demand use the restaurant tax to pay for it. And so that's just the truth. And so then what do you do? How do you then fund those things? You don't have, property taxes aren't necessarily built to fund that type of infrastructure, which is why the restaurant tax is so accommodating for those communities that have those things. And so we just have to acknowledge that and figure out how to react to it.
Tax, you're still just taxing the same people over again.
Exactly. So so you get revenue from your citizens, property taxes, and those people that work here. The people that will come here on the weekends, when you go to your restaurants, when you go to those places that are in town for whatever event, they are not contributing they are contributing economic activity and cost, but they're not contributing directly to the governments for those costs, right? And that's also true. That's just a fact. So when you have a DUI on the bypass, the police are dealing with it. Yeah, your alcohol tax is intended to try to capture that, doesn't capture all of it, because guess what? It's a speeding issue as well. It's not just always alcohol related. Or there's a car wreck at a busy intersection that consumes the police time. Those are expenses related to tourism that are not covered with tourism revenue because there's no restaurant tax here.
The restaurant tax is what, 2%, 3%?
3%.
3?
Yeah,
3%.
3%. And so, you know, you have to have that honest discussion if you're really trying to be equitable for the people that live in your city, right? Like, that's just the truth. I mean, you know,
And for the cost of the projects that people want, the property assessments and the number of residents of properties in Danville would just overly burden them on their annual tax bill. Lexington has massive number of citizens and residents and businesses compared to us. And so they were able to get their parks, tax that they passed was relatively small for their citizens just because of the sheer numbers. Josh and I and Tommy and I did some really dirty, quick math on it, and it is not feasible for our citizens in a realistic manner. It's just not for the level of, the cost that it takes to build those projects would be overly burdensome on Danville citizens.
Did Hazard put it on the ballot or just vote to have one?
They just voted, yeah,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
yeah, and service revenue doesn't necessarily cover those expenses
Okay.
too.
For some reason, I thought they put it on the ballot.
No, it wasn't on the ballot. So when you're dealing with those types of facilities, they do generate revenue. Those usually pay for their operating expenses. The debt service for the capital construction is really what you're trying to come up with.
And I try to remind folks, it's a usage tax. If you don't go to the restaurant and eat out, you don't pay it. But those thousands of folks who were at, on Center's campus last weekend, did a lot economic boost to our community, but not
And
everything to
currently,
the
as
rest.
the city, right, like Earl said, that does take more cost in police presence, fire presence,
Yes.
Public Works cleaning up the streets after they're gone. The only tangible way we see funds from that is through the net profit tax. And that, you know, is not always, doesn't always translate to profit when you have events here, right? The business is also going to have increased costs.
It tends to manage the operating expenses, doesn't manage the debt service profile,
That's big.
right?
It's
So,
big.
so those net profits can impact the operating expenses that we have tied to, but when it comes to that capital infrastructure, again, everybody says, well, why don't you have this and why don't you have that? Those types of revenue streams don't support the debt service.
And I have had another question, not related to taxes, but the fitness center under expenses, $500,000. Tell me some things that includes.
That's got all of your administrative staff
Okay.
for parks in it, so that number's a little bit higher than the direct cost to only manage that building. But it's not a lot, which is why we have to talk in good faith with that facility. I mean, you only have 125 to 150 members. The wellness center next door has over 4,000 now.
Yeah.
And so like it's a bad business model for a city. So when the city did that building, you didn't have any other options. There was no community, there was no wellness center, there was none of that.
Yeah.
But since then your hospital, as hospitals normally do, is they provide a wellness outreach program. So you have the wellness center, and then you've had some infill of the private sector for that low budget. When I say it like that, because that's what it is, that low cost entry point for fitness activities like Planet Fitness and the others. That's, you know, I've gone there at times, so it's not a derogatory thing. It's just a price point thing, and what you get out of the facility kind of reflects that.
Yeah.
Right?
Fitness center is the label for the activities that happen through Bunny Davis. So that also includes your day camp costs and
that's right,
staff in the summer. That's going to include, you know, your office support staff and things like that. That's not just to manage the small gym in the basement. So,
Yeah, and so when as we go, what we've not done, and in my mind, for me, we've not done a good analysis of what's our capacity, what's our expenses, how could we take those expenses and do something else with it and provide the same service and then generate maybe that revenue back. And so there's some analysis there that we've just frankly not matured the conversation with yet enough, because we're still trying to get our heads around the needs of the community, the big high-level thing. So we will start into that and try to come up with a way to help us understand what expenses, how could you take those expenses and reallocate them somewhere else and produce the same result, but then also get something else in addition to what you're doing. And so I'm trying to, and I know that's very vague in ways, but that's what the analysis that we've got to get through, right?
Well, and I think the ability to have increased membership at that location, we got to be realistic about that. What could we do to increase membership at that location?
Well, and then you got to understand, you got to understand too, and I say this, there is some baseline capacity analysis that you have to do, because you have a finite footprint for a pool there, you have a limited number of people, there is a finite number, and is that the correct investment? We still need to make sure we do that metric as we get into it.
Yes.
That is, you know,
Yeah.
can you spend the same money and double your potential number of users? I mean, we have to look at it like that, and you know, we're maturing that. I know that takes a while, but you know, just the site visits and everything that comes along with trying to make the right decision, it does take time. And to Tommy's credit and Josh's credit, they're doing a good job with trying to keep pressure on that path forward and trying to keep us focused on it, keep us as a group focused on it. So to their credit, they're trying to nudge it forward, and that's what it takes.
We've owned it for what, almost 30 years now?
Yeah,
So think
yeah.
about that. For 30 years, we've gotten a whole lot of investment out of that place. You know, that was going for 30 years. And I don't want to say what I'm thinking, but it's done good by us for 30 years.
I wanted to ask a question about the health insurance premium tax.
yes.
Did you say something, made a comment, something about how you can use the funds? So did you say something about parks?
Not with the health insurance.
Okay.
So,
must have
I mean,
misunderstood.
technically, health insurance premiums are not restricted in any way.
maybe that was-
It would just be a general fund revenue stream that would free up dollars to go to other things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Going back to the restaurant tax and the classification of the city we're at, Ian, how many more people do we need to get to the, get to the line?
Oh, so I mean, I think that was the way Hazard,
I don't know that the discussion at the state level really even happened, to be honest with you, this year. I think it's in a quagmire because there's active litigation, there's an appeal, that process is still playing out. So I think the state legislature is taking the position that we need to see what the court does prior to passing a law that could be set aside by that future court action. So I think everybody's in a holding pattern waiting for the legal system to play out. when I say everybody, I mean the folks in Frankfurt are in a holding pattern waiting on that. Question is, do you want to, is there a point in time where you probably don't wait on that anymore? Maybe you take a risk like Hazard did, and so we're analyzing that and trying to figure out, is there a point where we can recommend that or provide that as an alternative? I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. But we don't know what the classification population numbers are.
Well, they essentially did away with those
Yeah.
classifications, and that's how Hazard, my understanding is how they won their case, was that they had fallen below that population, but we exceed they were restaurant tax cities were formerly 4th and 5th class cities. We are 3rd class, and we're growing, so we're not close to being
Going the wrong way.
what used to be 2nd class, but we're growing in the wrong way.
Yeah.
For restaurant tax historical.
For the argument that Hazard used, Hazard won because they failed to provide a mechanism for them to go from a Class 3 city to a Class 4 city, and therefore be eligible to do the tax. So Hazard argued a loophole that we just can't argue.
Conversely, though, cities like Bardstown that do have a restaurant tax and used to be a 4th class city are now more similar in size to
Yeah.
Danville.
Yeah.
We cannot create a restaurant tax, but they do have an existing one, that's a holdover. So I think that's the direction that the people in our situation have been discussing in the groups that I attend, like the COLA conferences and the Government Finance Officers Association.
And indirectly, it has helped
Yes.
those communities to grow because of all the things that they offer.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why people move there now, besides just bourbon.
Class system, period, except for it remains in some of those old KRSs that they did not update and remove those labels from.
In terms of economic development, it gives those communities an economic advantage, and it puts you at an economic disadvantage, which is, and that's measurable. I mean, it just is.
And if we were to do it, attempt to do it, it's the 5 of us. And I'd say we ought to do it in a re-election year when we're all running for re-election. Let that be our re-election slogan. No, just joking. But the community doesn't get any, they can talk to us about it, they really don't get a vote. It's not a petition, it's not anything that's on the ballot, it's just the commission, the 4 of you all have to do it. He's trying to hurt me.
So that's all we have, unless you all want to do a deep dive into some numbers today. Otherwise, you're welcome to reach out, like I said. And no, because the restaurant tax is unknown. The starting point for us is what was on the screen, which is, let's just leave everything the way it is. There, we do understand that you can address the health insurance tax, the insurance premium tax were lowered to probably a more competitive number. So I wouldn't necessarily advocate if you needed money raising those. I would probably have to steer you towards the health insurance premium tax. Being at 0, that's just disproportionate to everybody else. And so you can't raise premium taxes over here just to artificially keep this one at 0. That's not really fair to this industry and this market. You want to treat all those industries the same.
But if we look at the income that it may generate for us, that's why it's been at 0 for some. It doesn't really generate a whole lot of income for us, does it?
Well, the health insurance premium tax rate, based on the work we did, if you remember last January-ish, we talked about it a lot. I mean, it's a potential fairly significant increase.
Yeah, it's like a $250,000 per percent.
Low rates.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah.
So 4% would be $1 million. Okay.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, I just remember something slow, okay.
right.
All right.
So, I mean, it's a revenue generator, but, like I
We
said,
hear about it.
when you change that rate and it goes into effect July 1st,
Yeah.
changes prior to March 21st.
Yeah.
So if you made
Same
changes
like the restaurant
in
tax.
the current year after March 21st, it would be fiscal 27 before you saw any revenue from that. And just based on feedback from last year and the hesitancy, we did not bring that back for your all's discussion at our regular meetings. We can't always bring that back at any point in time.
And to go above the compensating rate will require a referendum.
So above, you can take it above the compensating rate, but if it's a 4%, increase or larger, then you have a referendum.
Yeah. And go, well, see, my thing is, if we're gonna, if and when we get to the point where we're gonna do some of these things, there need to be sizable increases in revenue that will weigh the increase in revenue compared to the flat that we're gonna receive, the fallout that you might receive. But, and see, to me, that's why the restaurant tax, I was like, wow, it just seems like so easy. Yeah.
I think it's a little confusing. It might be good if you can kind of explain it, or let's dig into it deeper. If they have no classification of cities, then what's holding us back from talking about the restaurant tax?
Well, for you
Are
all,
you serious?
we did provide you a little list of what the challenges are. That's your public backlash that you all would be subject to, your legal risks, which we've discussed a little bit here, and primarily the tourism tax is derived by the tourism, it's a tourism tax, and so you have a tourism board that decides how those funds are spent. Currently, our tourism board makeup is a city-county board. So in my
We could be the tourism board.
estimation, we would need to reconsider how that board is structured, because if it's a city-generated restaurant tax, then the city would want to fully decide how those funds are spent. So, the
we be the
biggest risk out of all of those is obviously your legal risk. You could implement it and it be denied by the courts. It could be overturned by the Attorney General. The legislature in a few years could come and do something that changes it. But that's your all's, as our governing body, that is the conversation and decision you all have to make one way or the other.
The legal ramifications will be how you get the money back, right? With a penalty probably. Who does it go back to?
Well,
Stop.
presumably, if you all elected to pass a restaurant tax, you would need to, probably couldn't have it start in July 1st of this year, because tax compliance, you need to give businesses a significant period of time to prepare.
We get it done.
Realistically, it would either be the start of the calendar year for a tax year or the next fiscal year. And then you would presumably face challenges during that period. But once it started, if we had not seen legal challenge, once we started collecting it, our suggestion would probably be not to spend any of those funds for at least a year if there were no legal challenges in the state elsewhere, just from a purely practical standpoint, because if you did have to give that money back, you would want it. I don't know exactly how that would happen. That is a Stephen Dexter question.
Yeah, it's probably just take the stop, yeah. It's, well, was not discussed at all, was it? In the legislature this time, no discussion at
No.
all. No.
We talked to Daniel, this was the first time he was even open to discuss it, that he understood the unfairness of it all. So I thought that was a good sign
Progress,
anyway.
yeah, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, and Senator Bledsoe as well.
It sure could wipe off some of these major projects on our list.
It could fund a lot of things based on, I had an intern that did a project over the fall that looked into what it would mean for the city to have a restaurant tax. We did have to focus primarily on the sales generated by alcohol selling entities, just because we couldn't get the tax data from the county due to some extenuating circumstances at that point in time. We also looked at what Harrodsburg brings in with their restaurant tax. And you are looking at a very rough estimate of at least $1 million, $1.5 million a year in restaurant tax dollars. That would go a long way toward facilities that qualify, but
And
that's
free up some other money.
that's a very big risk on your all's behalf.
Have we looked lately at the cost difference in having the county collect our taxes as opposed to doing it in-house?
So the cost, we haven't done a deep dive into the cost of it. That is a conversation that Earl and I have
We did.
regularly.
I did that right before she came. But we've not done it since then. She and I, what she was about to say is true. I wasn't trying to like take the mic from her, but I did just strictly because we did try to investigate that.
Yeah.
And she wasn't a party to that conversation. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who collects it necessarily. It does matter how much you're paying the county to do it.
Yeah.
But it's that efficiency number that controls, right? And there's a
Absolutely.
big revenue difference between 93% efficient and 83% efficient, you know? And so we have to figure out, where are we at currently? Are we closer to 83 or closer to 93? You know, if you're closer to 93, then we're good. You're coming out way ahead. But we just don't know those things, and so she and I actively talked even this week, just briefly, about how are we going to analyze that moving forward to make sure that the county's auditing that in a way that we have confidence that it's that higher number. And so that's in our minds for sure. We hear you, and we need to be able to answer that question. Right now, that's my answer. I'm not saying it's a
Fair
good
enough.
one,
What's the
but,
charge? What are they charging us?
we,
So for a sheer dollar amount, we pay a percentage, and off the top of my head, I think it's around 1.5 or 1.75% of their collections. In dollar numbers, for this fiscal year, we're estimating $356,000. Last fiscal year, it was $325,000. I do know that they are in the process of an upgrade to their occupational tax license, or to their tax system. Their old system was very, very old. And so they're working through that. That is supposed to give them better ability to process things quickly. Taxpayers will be able to submit their tax filings online, which they cannot do now. All of that is submitted paper documents and manually coded into their system. So they are actively working on some efficiency efforts. And hopefully we see the benefit of that once that comes online, but I don't have an update on when they're going live.
and let me add this. One of the reasons why why I want us to talk about it is when we did the look, the last time that transfer was like $230,000. And so it has grown as the occupational tax revenues changed. Then our number this year is $356,000. So it warrants a different analysis. It's definitely time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to see it as well. I think we mentioned it last year.
Full-time person can do that for us.
Yeah. So remember, it was just $200,000 last time that we looked at it. So
Right.
once every 3 to 5 years is probably right to reinvestigate it, but.
Anything else,
That is all we have for you.
commissioners? Anything else? Ashley and Jenny, anything else? When's the lunch gonna arrive? What's that? Oh, the next time, oh, okay. So let's, the chair will entertain a motion for adjournment then. Don't slow. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, we're adjourned.